People born between 1970 and 1980 rarely talk about their emotions. Not because they don't feel deeply, and not because they are cold, but because they learned something very important very early in life. They learned that emotions were not always welcome. In the environment they grew up in, discipline often mattered more than feelings. Being strong was more important than being understood, and showing vulnerability was sometimes seen as weakness. So instead of asking, "What do you feel?" they were often told, "Be quiet, be strong. Don't make a problem out of it." And over time, this shapes a person. Because when a child repeatedly learns that their emotions are too much, or inconvenient, or unnecessary, they don't stop feeling. They just stop showing it. And slowly, without even realizing it, they begin to separate themselves from their own emotions. Not completely, but just enough to function. Just enough to survive in that environment. And eventually, that way of being becomes normal. Not expressing, not reacting, not opening up. From the outside, it looks like strength. But on the inside, it often starts as adaptation. As children, they were not really taught how to understand their emotions. They were taught how to control them. There's a difference. Instead of learning how to say, "I feel hurt," they learned how to stay quiet. Instead of asking, "Why do I feel this way?" they learned to ignore the feeling altogether. They were told to behave, not to express. To listen, not to question. To adapt, not to complain. And when they did try to express something emotional, it was often met with discomfort. "Stop crying. You're overreacting. Be strong." So they began to understand something deeper. That emotions were not something to explore, but something to manage, something to hide. And over time, they became very good at it. They learned how to swallow their reactions, how to keep a straight face, how to disconnect from what they felt just enough to stay accepted. Because for a child, acceptance is everything, even if it means leaving parts of yourself behind. As they grew older, this emotional pattern didn't disappear. It became stronger, more automatic. They no longer had to think about hiding their feelings. It just happened. They stopped expecting emotional support from others, because deep down, they didn't believe it would come. So they relied on themselves. They became independent, capable, resilient. From the outside, this looks like strength, and in many ways, it is. But this kind of strength is not built on freedom. It's built on necessity. Because when you grow up learning that your emotions are not safe to express, you don't stop feeling them. You just learn to carry them alone, quietly. And over time, this creates distance. Not because they don't care, but because they were never taught how to stay emotionally open. So instead of connecting deeply, they stay slightly guarded, always composed, always in control, even when something inside them wants to break through. As adults, they often become the people others depend on. They are reliable, consistent, emotionally stable on the surface. They show up when things matter. They handle pressure without falling apart. They keep going, even when it's difficult. And because of that, others see them as strong, as someone who doesn't need much. But that perception can be misleading, because just because someone doesn't ask for help doesn't mean they don't need it. It usually means they learned not to. So instead of reaching out, they process everything internally. They think it through. They push it down. They move forward. And they do it again and again, until it becomes their default way of existing. Self-contained, self-managed, self-reliant. Even in moments where connection would actually help them the most. On the outside, they often appear calm, grounded, in control of themselves, like nothing really overwhelms them. But internally, it can feel very different, because what isn't expressed doesn't disappear. It stays, as pressure, as tension, as thoughts that never fully settle. And because they were never taught how to process emotions in a healthy way, they learned something else. They learned how to carry them, silently, to move forward while holding everything inside, to function even when something feels unresolved. And over time, this creates a quiet kind of exhaustion, not always visible, not always obvious, but always present, somewhere beneath the surface. This doesn't mean they are emotionally unavailable, and it doesn't mean they don't feel deeply. In many cases, they feel more than they show. But they were never taught how to safely express those feelings, so they adapted. They learned to stay composed, to stay controlled, to stay strong. And that adaptation became part of who they are. Their strength is real, but it was built in an environment where being open was not always safe. And their silence is not emptiness. It's history. It's protection. It's a pattern that once helped them belong and survive. And understanding that changes how you see them